Furious, I drove to my cheating wife's lover's house to confront him, but when he turned pale and tried to shut the door, I kicked it open. What I saw inside was a nightmare that made me knock him out and call the police. In utter shock, the first crack in my perfect life appeared on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday evening. Helena, my wife, of 11 years, breezed into our Prague apartment. Her cheeks flushed from the cold and her perfume lingering in the air. She greeted me with a quick kiss. Other eyes darted to her phone, which buzzed insistently in her coat pocket. I didn't think much of it at first. Helena's job as an event planner for Thessady's elite often meant unpredictable schedules and demanding clients. She thrived in chaos. Her energy contagious, but lately that energy had felt distant, like a part of her existed. In a world I wasn't invited to, it was. The small things that gwed at me, the late-night showers, the whispered phone calls, the new lingerie I hadn't seen her. Where at home I told myself I was imagining it. After all, I was no stranger to stress either. As an architect, my own long hours left little room for suspicion. But then came the bracelet. I found it while searching the glove compartment of her car for parking receipts. A delicate gold chain nestled in a velvet box with a tiny charm shaped like a heart. My initial reaction was one of warmth. Surely it was for me, a surprise for our upcoming anniversary. But when the day came and went, the bracelet never appeared. My heart sank. I tried to shake off the unease, but it lingered, growing stronger with each passing day. Helena's behavior didn't help. She began leaving for work earlier and returning later. Her phone, once casually left on the counter, was now glued to her hand or hidden away. One night as we sat on the couch watching a movie, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She grabbed it so quickly that the sudden movement startled me. "Work," she muttered, her eyes flicking to me before turning back to the screen. But her hand trembled slightly and her smile didn't reach her eyes. I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The turning point came on a Thursday night. Helena was in the shower, her phone left, charging on the nightstand. I hesitated, my conscience wearing with my growing suspicion, but when the screen lit up with a message preview, my heart stopped. "Miss you already, gorgeous. Friday can't come soon enough." Martin. I stared at the message, the words searing into my brain. Martin, the name was vaguely familiar. Helena had mentioned him once, a wealthy client who was planning a series of high-profile events. "He's exhausting," she had said with a laugh. But there was no frustration in this text, only intimacy. My hands shook as I placed the phone back on the nightstand. The shower turned off, and I quickly stepped out of the bedroom, pretending to busy myself in the kitchen. When Helena appeared, her hair wrapped in a towel, I greeted her with forced casualness. She didn't seem to notice the tension in my voiceover. The next few days I began piecing together the puzzle. Martin Sakura, a flashy entrepreneur with a penchant for expensive parties, was exactly the kind of client who would demand Helena's attention. But the texts suggested something far beyond a professional relationship. I decided to follow her. On Friday evening, Helena dressed impeccably. A sleek black dress, heels that accentuated her long legs, and a hint of red lipstick. "Client dinner," she said, avoiding my gaze as she kissed me goodbye. As soon as she left, I grabbed my car keys and followed her. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I trailed her through Prague's cobblestone streets. The city lights blurred in my peripheral vision, my focus solely on the silver car ahead of me. She pulled into the driveway of a sprawling villa on the outskirts of the city. The house, all glass and steel, loomed against the night sky like a monument to excess. I parked a safe distance away, watching as she walked to the door. Martin greeted her with a grin, his hand lingering on her back as he ushered her inside. The betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. I sat in my car for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing with anger and disbelief. Finally, I made a decision. This wasn't over. I needed answers, and I was going to get them no matter what it took. The next evening, I found myself standing in front of Martin's villa. My heart pounded as I pressed the doorbell, the chime echoing through the cold night air. My mind replayed 100 scenarios. confronting him, demanding the truth, or simply unleashing the fury that burned incidem. After a few tense moments, the door opened. Martin stood there, his sharp features lit by the glow from the house. He was dressed casually, a glass of wine in hand, but his expression changed. The moment he saw me, his confident demeanor faltered, replaced by a flicker of fear. "Victor," he said, his voice strained. "What are you doing? Here, you know exactly why I'm here." I said, stepping closer. "Where's—" Helena Martin's hand tightened on the door frame. "She's not here," he said, quickly, his voice rising slightly. "You're mistaken." I took another step forward, forcing him to backpedal. "I followed her here last night, Martin. Don't lie to me." He tried to shut the door, but I jammed my foot against it, my anger boiling over with a burst of strength. I shoved the door open and stepped inside. Martin stumbled back, his composure crumbling. "You need to leave," he said, his voice trembling. "You don't understand." "Then make me understand." I shot back. "Where is she?" His eyes darted to the hallway, betraying him. I followed his gaze and saw a door at the end, slightly ajar. Something about the way he panicked told me the answers I sought were behind that door. As I moved toward it, Martin lunged at me, grabbing my arm. "Don't go in there," he shouted. I shoved him off me, my adrenaline surging. "Stay out of my way." I growled and kicked the door open. The sight that greeted me was something I could never have prepared, for the door slammed against the wall, revealing a room shrouded in dim light and thick tension. The air smelled faintly of sweat and stale colonomy. Heart raced as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. Helena sat in the corner, her arms tied behind her back, and hermit-gagged tears strew her face. Her makeup smudged her dress. The one she had worn for client dinners was wrinkled and torn at the hem. Her eyes widened when she saw me, a flicker of relief cutting through the terror. "Helena." I rushed to her, my hands trembling as I tried to free the knots around her wrists. "What the hell is going on?" she whimpered through the gag, shaking her head frantically as if trying to warn me. Before I could process her reaction, a shadow loomed behind me. Martin lunged, a heavy candlestick raised high. I spun around just in time to block the blow, the force reverberating through my arm. Adrenaline surged as we struggled. His face twisted in desperation. He was stronger than I expected, his movements wild and erratic. "You shouldn't have come here," he growled, his voice laced with panic. I managed to shove him off, grabbing the candlestick from his grip. My chest heaved as I stood over him, my mind clouded with anger and disbelief. "What did you do to her?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "She wanted this," he spat. Crawling backward, she came to me willingly. "Liar." Helena's muffled scream broke through my haze, her voice roar with pain reignited my fury. Martin tried to make a run for it, but I swung the candlestick, knocking him to the ground. He crumpled, groaning in pain. I turned back to Helena, untying the ropes with a mix of urgency and rage. As the gag fell away, she gasped for air. "He was blackmailing me," she choked out, her voice hoarse. "He said he'd ruin my career, our lives, if I didn't come here." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. The betrayal I had imagined was nothing compared to the reality. Martin wasn't just her lover. He was her tormentor, and now he was unconscious. On the floor of his own gilded cage, Helena clung to me as I dialed the police. My hands trembled not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what had just unfolded. The operator's calm voice guided me through the steps, though therage in my chest threatened to overwhelm. Officers arrived within minutes, their flashing lights slicing through the darkness. Helena's statement poured out in fragments. Martin's threats, the coercion, the night she spent trapped in his twisted games, the hidden cameras in the room, the photos he had taken without her consent, and a cache of incriminating messages provided irrefutable evidence. Martin regained consciousness as the police secured the scene. His face was pale, his arrogance shattered as the officers cuffed him. He sneered at me. You think. You've won. You have no idea what you're dealing with, no, I said coldly, stepping closer. You have no idea who you've messed with. The officers led him away, and for the first time that night, the house felt quiet. Helena sat on the edge of the couch. Her face buried in her hands, I knelt beside her, unsure of what to say. The woman I thought had betrayed me was instead a victim, ensnared in a nightmare neither of us saw. Coming in the days that followed, the truth about Martin spread like wildfire. His arrest made headlines exposing not only his crimes against Helena, but also a web of other victims who came forward. With similar stories, he had used his wealth and influence to manipulate and exploit women, leaving a trail of shattered lives in his wake. Helena faced the fallout. With quiet resilience share-signed from her job, unwilling to face, the whispers and stares of her colleagues' therapy became a lifeline for her, a way to process the trauma and rebuild her sense of self. Our marriage, however, hung by a thread. One evening, as we sat on the balcony overlooking the city, she broke the silence. Victor, she began, her voice trembling. I know I failed you. I should have told you the truth from the beginning. I was so scared. I looked at her, the woman I had loved, and doubted in equal measure. You didn't fail me, I said after a long pause. You were trapped, but trust takes time to rebuild. She nodded, tears spilling onto her cheeks. I'll do whatever it takes. In the weeks that followed, we took small steps toward healing, but something had changed in me. The anger that once consumed me had transformed into a steely determination, not just to rebuild our lives, but to ensure that Martin face every consequence of his actions. Months later, I stood outside Martin's villa. The property, once a symbol of his arrogance, now sat vacant. The grass had grown wild, and the polished windows were streaked with dust. His empire had crumbled, his assets seized, and his name dragged through the mud. Justice, it seemed, had been served. But revenge is a peculiar thing. It doesn't fill the void left by betrayal or erase the scars of pain. As I stared at the abandoned house, I realized that my victory wasn't in Martin's downfall, it was in reclaiming my life. Helena and I eventually parted ways, not out of bitterness, but because we both needed space to heal fully. She moved to a quiet town by the coast, dedicating her time to helping other survivors of coercion and abuse. I stayed in Prague, channeling my energy into my work and rediscovering the passion that had once defined me. One evening, I found myself walking along the Vava River, the city lights shimmering on the water. The path felt like a distant echo, a chapter closed but not forgotten. I thought about Helena, about the love we shared and the trials we endured, and then I let it all go. The way the river carries away fallen leaves as the breeze rustled the trees, I whispered to myself, true justice isn't about revenge, it's about finding peace with that. I turned and walked away, ready to embrace the next chapter of my life. Thank you for being a part of this story with me. If it moved you, please give the video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to Lauren's story. I've noticed many of you who enjoy these stories aren't subscribed yet. By subscribing, you're not just following a channel, you're becoming part of a community that values deep, meaningful storytelling. Let's continue exploring these heartfelt journeys together. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you won't miss our next story.